Why are young women trending more liberal? Why are young men trending more conservative? And is it true that it's harder for ambitious women in the career world to find a husband? Wouldn't you like to have a man's perspective on all this? Well, maybe you wouldn't, but we are going to get a man's perspective today. Welcome to the show, my friend, Alex Feinberg. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Gina. Always a pleasure to be here.
I think this is the third time you're on the show.
Maybe four. I don't know.
Maybe fourth. Yeah, because the very first time is when I had my podcast with my friend Mike.
Yeah.
You came on then. And I remember when you came on that show, Mike didn't know who you were. Mm-hmm. And I was like, look, my friend's cool. He's going to come on. Mike's like, okay. And after you left, he was like, that was a really good episode. Yeah. I was like, yeah, Alex is a cool dude. He knows a couple things. He's been around the block a few times.
Done a couple things, was a pro athlete at one point, worked at a hedge fund at one point, worked at Google with a lot of feminists at one point.
Yep.
So got a lot of things feeding the brain, feeding the perspective here.
Yeah, I like to get your perspective on a lot of things. And I kind of prepped you a little bit before we started. There are a few questions that I like to ask on my show about dating, marriage, professional women. And I also really want to start, we can start with this today. I want to start by asking you why you think that so many young women are trending liberal while so many young men are trending conservative.
I think you first have to figure out where the information is coming from that's leading each group in the direction that they're going. And so if you think of the education system as a propaganda factory, which I think we do, women are more likely to be good students than men. Over the last couple decades, the amount of women who have gone to universities or who are going to universities massively exceeds the amount of men who are going in that direction. Now, I don't know nominally if the amount of men are going down, but I know as a percentage of the population, the percentage of men who are going to the universities relative to women is less, right? So women gravitate towards this mainstream regime message that's spit out by the university system, the mainstream media, and the Democratic Party, whereas men are more likely to think on their own, develop their own idea of what's going on. They're less likely to be consensus-based reasoning, like determine the truth based on what the average of my friends are saying. Men are much more likely to go online and say, oh, I saw that YouTube video. I saw this TikTok clip. I saw this Instagram reel. I don't think that what my professor in the university system said is true. Women are much more likely to go to universities, get good grades in universities, have their egos wrapped around in the fact that they were good students, and swallow that message hook, line, and sinker, right? So I think the reason why we're seeing such bifurcation between sexes starts out in the university system, but ultimately ends up in the platforms of the political parties, because you have to understand that both parties just want to be in power. Right. So the Democrats used to represent the working Americans, because working Americans had the capacity to put them in power, 50% of the time. But as unions lost, strength, and as the middle class started to become hollowed out, partly by Democratic policies, the Democrats could no longer rely on working class men and working class families to keep them in office. So then they had to pivot towards, attracting more women, right? Because they've always been, they've post-Kennedy, they've always been fairly decent at securing minority votes. But you realize, actually, we need to get women to replace the middle-class families that we used to represent. So their platform has shifted to representing women, where the Republican platform has, for the most part, always represented men, right? If you look at how presidential elections would go if only men could vote, or if only men's votes counted, the Republican candidate would have won like 19 out of the last 20 elections. And the same thing is true with Democrats. If only female votes counted, the Democratic candidate would have won like 19 out of the last 20 elections. So there's always been this split between men and women, where women support larger government, men support more individualism. And then as we've seen greater alliances between the university system, the mainstream media, and the Democratic Party, that wedge has simply increased.
Do you think it's even worth it for the conservative side, the right, the Republican Party, to try to appeal to women more? Or is our time better spent building up young men that will lead women? Because the reason I ask this is because I grew up in the school system. I went to college. I did all the right things. I went to graduate school. I was the quintessential woman who I wouldn't say fell prey, but ended up going with the liberal ideologies. And the thing that brought me out was the leadership of men in my life. And so you hear a lot of people online talking about how it's actually not going to be politics that's going to change women's minds. What we need is stronger leadership. And the more that we build up strong young men to lead their families, to lead women, even like through marriage, I can't tell you how many women I know, once they got married, they're like almost immediately conservative.
Sure.
And that's the thing that really changes women, becoming mothers, even before becoming mothers, getting married. So do you think it's even worth it from a political standpoint to try to appeal to women? Or should we focus more on this sort of cultural, familial, social side where the men are going to end up leading the women? Which do you think is going to be?
I think we can do both. I don't think it serves the Republican Party if their goal is to be in power. It doesn't serve them to be as pro-life as they are, right? Whether you are pro-life or you are pro-choice, if you want to get elected, it doesn't serve, okay, so you can be against late-term abortions, right? But, did overturning Roe versus Wade do the Republicans any favor in terms of gaining seats? No, it did not, right? So, if I'm a Republican candidate and my goal is to be in office, what I can promise people is that we're not going to see more abortions under my rule. We're not going to see abortion law become more permissive, but we're also not going to roll back the abortion access that people already have. And guess what? That's going to maximize the amount of votes that you're going to get. So on one hand, I think that type of strategy would be effective for Republicans or conservatives to gain power. On the other hand, you also have to look at, okay, in order for women to be submissive to men, there has to be a reason for them to be submissive to men. So, if women are working jobs that pay more than a lot of men in their age cohort, which is very common these days because you look at all the DEI initiatives of large corporations and especially tech corporations that are paying some of the higher paying jobs, these companies are going to prioritize women in the 20 to 30 age bracket over men in that age bracket.
Right.
So you're going to see a lot of white collar workers who I'm a single independent woman. I don't need a man, right? Okay, so what's going to change that? Economic realities might change that. So if AI starts to displace a lot of these white collar workers and all of a sudden blue collar workers, who I'm sure you guys are realizing are quite expensive these days. It's very difficult for us to find a blue collar worker to come onto our house to do work for less than $40 or $50 an hour. That's on the lower end. Okay, so if you have a good trade skill, you're a plumber, you're an electrician, you can fix HVACs. You don't need to go to college for that. You don't need to have student loans for that. You can make $200,000 doing that. Well, guess what? If there's less beta males working for these white collar corporations who want all of their employees to be waving rainbow flags and supporting DEI initiatives, all of a sudden you have a blue collar man now who typically is going to lean right. More likely to be somebody who's going to vote Republican, support Trump. All of a sudden, that guy can make a living wage, like the South Park episode where the richest people in the community were the handymen. That's not that far from the future. Well, guess what? That type of man can lead a woman. That type of man can provide for a woman. Now, I was in the pool about a week ago at our Lifetime gym in Austin, and I did hear a woman say, I can't date a man who didn't go to college. And so there is that challenge where it's not just the income difference that a lot of women are looking for. Women have been brainwashed to think that status is inextricably linked with educational attainment within a university structure.
Yes.
And so it's going to be hard for women to submit to men en masse unless there's something that these men can give to them that they can't get by themselves.
Right.
So I think that probably a very, very unique set of circumstances allowed you to come to the realization that you came to. I still don't see most women coming to that realization until they get to be 35, 40 years old. And by then, a lot of them are pot committed to being, single independent women. And there's not much that they can necessarily do to change that unless they have a lot of money for fertility enhancement. And even if they do, it's certainly not guaranteed to work, and it's not going to work, for multiple children.
Right, right. Yeah, going back to what you said about the woman saying, "Oh, I would never date somebody who didn't go to college." It reminds me of a lot of these TikToks, Twitter, Instagram, a lot of these videos coming out of women crying, talking about how hard it is to find a husband.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that comes to my mind, I take as much information as I can get from their profile, but it's pretty easy to see that these women are professionally successful.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have a great job, live in a coastal city. These are the kinds of women who will only date at the same, what they consider to be their status or above. That significantly shrinks the dating pool for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about the men who they would consider their counterparts.
Mm-hmm.
Those men, and we can talk about this too, they generally don't really want a woman like that. They're going to go for a number of reasons. They're going to go for somebody younger.
Right.
They're going to go for somebody, I mean, even if they can't articulate, that's more fertile. They're going to go for somebody more feminine.
Oh, they can articulate it. They're just scared too.
So now you have these women who are 30, 33, 35. They are what society would be considered like very successful. They're making good money, but they cannot get married.
Yeah.
And they can't have kids because they are unwilling to consider men in different demographics who didn't go to college, who don't have a white collar job, who don't have whatever other things on their checkoff list. So let's talk about that. What's going to happen with that? And then we can also piggyback off that and talk about why is it that men don't want women in these roles? Okay,
so there's a number of different reasons we can talk about it. Between men and women, there's greater variance in male outcomes. So if we were to look at, say, IQ, everybody's familiar with IQ, how a normal distribution works. The standard deviation for IQ across the population is 15, but hypothetically, say if it's 17 for men and 13 for women, that means in order to have an IQ in the top 2.5% of the population, a man only has to have an IQ 1.8 standard deviations above the male mean, where a female has to have an IQ that's like 2.3 standard deviations above the female mean. So if you're familiar with Z-scores that you maybe learned about in middle school or high school, there's actually a huge difference in terms of representation in that far right tail of the population. So the extreme performers, those who are going to be in the top 2 or 3% and bottom 2 or 3%, are going to be disproportionately men. So the least successful people in our society are going to be like 75% men. The most successful people in our society, if we're going to use financial or career achievements, are going to be 75% men, assuming no differences in desires. And of course, there are differences in desires. Okay, so starting out, there's going to be more successful men than there are going to be successful women. So that should actually help the women in terms of dating, because there should be 3 of them to every 1 woman or something like that, 2 to every 1 woman. However, the way companies are structured, there is a throttling of your ascent within the corporate environment from 22 years old to 32 years old, where a lot of people at 22 could do the job of a 27-year-old, at 27 could do the job of a 32-year-old. But the way companies keep costs down is by prolonging the time it takes to get promoted and maximizing the number of promotion steps between the bottom level and the director or the VP.
Right.
Okay. So it's an artificially constrained environment that requires you to take 10 years to accomplish something that a smart person might be able to accomplish in 4 or 5. Okay. So what does that constraint do? It means that the people who've got to the finish line are all going to be 32 years old. Okay. Well, does a successful 32-year-old male want to date a successful 32-year-old female? Well, if he had the choice, most successful 32-year-old men, according to OkCupid data, would want to date 23-year-old women. In fact, most 42-year-old men, according to OkCupid data, would want to date 23-year-old women.
Right.
So
sorry, ladies.
Regardless of the regardless of the age of the man who has a choice will find the 23-year-old woman to be most attractive. That's physically attractive. Of course, there's an emotional component. You got to get along. So presumably, as men get older, they're not all dating 23-year-old women, even though 23-year-old women are the ones whom they find to be the most attractive. Okay, so that means that the men in that high-performing cohort are all going to be dating, or mostly going to be dating women who are 25 years old, 27 years old, 23 years old. Well, guess what? The 32-year-old woman has her back against the wall relative to the 27, 25-year-old woman for two reasons. Number one, she's older, right? And so men are going to find the younger women on average to be, more attractive. She's also busier with her career, right? And she's also focused on her career, right? And so there is a lack of femininity. Like femininity historically has not helped many people succeed in the corporate environment. So you look at the archetypal successful woman like a Hillary Clinton, right? That person, she's not feminine. In fact, there's rumors circulating that she's a lesbian.
Yeah. Huma Abedin and
yeah,
her.
Yeah. And if you look at what type of people succeed in sports, it is predominantly heterosexual men and homosexual females who are going to be represented in elite athletic performance, right?
Right.
Nobody seems to scratch their head like, why is that? Why are all the elite athletes attracted to women regardless of what their gender is, right?
Right.
Is that completely random? I think it's not. There's something to do with dominance, success, power. And being attracted to women.
Yeah.
Okay.
And very feminine women. Look at all the professional athletes. They get the most beautiful, most feminine women, too. It's not even just women. It's like the most feminine, most beautiful women.
Okay. I'm less well versed in who these women are dating. I just happen to know that they're highly disproportionately dating women. Okay. So there is this hypermasculinity is going to be rewarded in hyper-competitive fields. It just is, whether it's sports, whether it's a corporate environment, whether it's anything. Hyper-masculinity tends to be rewarded at the tail end of performance. And so the women who are feminine are typically not rewarded for being feminine. So those people are just not going to be interested in competing in these environments that don't reward them for being who they are. And the masculine side of all women, because every woman has some degree of masculinity within her, those are going to be amplified in order to succeed in the corporate jungle or the athletic jungle.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. I covered this a little bit a few episodes ago, and I asked the question, why is it so hard for professionally successful women to find a husband? And now, because universities and these corporate structures, they want more women, they're restructuring things to have more and more women in these spaces, then you're ending up with more and more women who are going to end up childless. And then you look at the broader structure of the declining birth rate, declining fertility rate. Speaking of like the declining birth rate, JD Vance, he had a previous clip when he was on Tucker, it looked like from a couple years ago maybe, where he talked about childless cat ladies running the government. And this has caused a really big stir. And Jennifer Aniston responded to it on her Instagram and said that it was, a very cruel thing. I hope your daughter never struggles with infertility. But there's something to be said about his concept of childless people should not be running the government. And that's something that I tend to agree with. But even further than that, people are now claiming that this kind of rhetoric from the right is the reason why women are trending more liberal rather than conservative. I have my thoughts on that, but I would love to hear your thoughts, because a lot of people are blaming the red pill manosphere. They're blaming any rhetoric coming from conservative men, saying that there's misogyny coming from the right, and that's why women are not turning more conservative, because they feel like they're constantly being put down and bashed by men on the right.
Well, any movement is going to have an extreme element to it. And so if you want to neuter your enemy or neuter the message of your enemy, you create the idea that the reason why they're struggling is because of their core message, right? That's how you get them to change their core message. So it's obviously true that the extreme elements of either party are a turnoff to people in the center who are trying to decide if they want to go left or they want to go right. And so, whether is it JD Vance or comments similar to what JD Vance made that are turning women off? Well, no, I'd actually say it's probably more people on the left who are taking these comments and blowing them out of proportion, taking them out of context,
right,
or intentionally not providing the context of, well, actually, if you look at who votes for the Democratic Party, it is the only demographic that they dominate is single women and minorities.
That's right.
And so objectively, it's true, right? Where I think for a lot of women in the center who still get their news from mainstream outlets, they think that this is just some diatribe that J.D. Vance said that has no relationship with objective reality. They don't realize that the statistics actually say that what he says is correct. Maybe not the cat lady portion, but the fact that they are childless is correct. Okay. The reason why they're voting for Democrats they're not childless because they vote for Democrats. They're Democrats because they're childless, right? They've been focusing on themselves their whole lives. A lot of the ideology that's been fed to American women has been fed to them to enhance their capacity as consumers and workers. So you have to understand that American women are actually fed the most bullshit of any group in the world because they control over 70% of consumer spending in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Okay, so if you have a cohort that controls 70% of consumer spending in the wealthiest country in the world, that cohort's going to have their ego like fluffed up at every corner, being told, "Oh, you deserve this. You should have this. You can have better that." However, they also represent about 50% of the population, even more, 52% of the population, and so they can be workers that can be exploited and taxed. And they're also more obedient, and so they're going to be less likely to steal from the companies that they work for. They're going to probably be more likely to work for longer tenures than a lot of men are, all things being equal, which of course they're not. And so American women are actually massively exploited. They're just not massively exploited by the group that they think is exploiting them. They think that they're exploited by conservatives who want to turn them into baby vessels and nothing else. No, they're actually being exploited by the university system that's telling them that they can have it all when objectively they can't. They're actually being exploited by their corporations who tell them that they can have it all when objectively they can't. They're being exploited by the media that's telling them that they're being oppressed when they're not, only so they can get more female eyeballs on their content and they can sell more lucrative advertising space to the marketers who want to get their message in front of the American consumers.
That's right.
So American women are flooded with messages that are complete bullshit because they write the biggest checks, they serve as the largest voting bloc, and they're also the largest group of people who corporations can exploit for cheap labor.
Is there anything we can do about that?
You got to find people who you think are smart, who seem to have succeeded without relying on the messages of the institutions that make you scratch your head the most. So start with the inconsistencies where I don't understand why this group is saying this if they're also saying that. Okay. That gives you a hint. If there's contradictory messaging from an institution, it's most likely because either you don't understand it or they're lying to you. And I would say if I had to bet between the two, it's probably because they're lying to you. You need to find people who aren't necessarily capable of explaining why they're lying to you, but can succeed without paying attention to that message, right? So successful entrepreneurs are typically very good at ignoring mainstream messages because those mainstream messages weren't for them. If they listened to the mainstream message, they would have gone to college. They would have taken on student debt. They would have climbed within a corporation. All of those things didn't serve them. So they had to figure everything out on their own. Okay. Find people who've been able to figure things out on their own. They'll be able to explain things a lot better to you than people who've only been able to navigate with the help of the corporation. So if you're an animal in a zoo and you want to learn how to hunt for yourself, you need to go spend time with wild animals. You're never going to learn how to hunt for yourself by spending all your time in the zoo. Hanging around other animals who get their food by being in captivity and being compliant to the zookeepers and getting their meals that way. Got to start spending time with the wild animals, which are the entrepreneurs.
Right. Do you think that the right should tone down language like that in order to attract more female voters? Because when I hear that question online, my initial reaction is, I don't think it would make a difference. I don't think that if people like J.D. Vance or anyone on the right, I don't think if they, quote, toned down their language towards women, I think that those women would still hate these men the same way because they hate everything that the conservative men say and that everything the right says.
Until they need them.
Until they need them.
Right. So let's think about a situation when they need them. when their lives are in danger, they need them. Okay. So if they're in blue cities that are being overrun by homelessness, that are being overrun by crime, and nobody's doing anything about it, the Republicans need to make it very clear that the Democrats are the party of lawlessness. They're the party of anarchy.
Chaos.
They're the party that wants to advocate for policies that will enable people to rape you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is the second order effect of no cash bail. This is the second order effect of giving all these vagrants second, third, 50th chances in life.
Cases of rape in New York City have been up 11% recently. That was like
I'm surprised it's that low. I would think it'd be much
more. It probably is higher, and that's like all that's just reported and gathered.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, a difference between the left and the right is the left will give people second and third chances when they don't deserve it. And the right might not give people a second chance if they do deserve it. But in my life experience, probably in yours, typically when people mess up big twice, they're going to keep messing up no matter how many chances that you give them.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if we want to be charitable, sometimes people can mess up big once and they can rebound from that. Usually they don't. Usually if somebody messes up big once, they're going to mess up twice, third time, fourth time, fifth time. Now, if we want to be a charitable society, I think the only discussion we should have is, does somebody deserve a second chance after blowing the first? Okay. If somebody's blown their second chance, done. Write them off. Otherwise, we're going to live in a highly unstable, highly unsafe society.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But so election year, what are your predictions on Kamala and how she stands up against Trump?
They're in the process, obviously, of rewriting history to make Kamala seem more competent than she's been. Or who knows? She might have been incredibly competent as the borders are, because her initiatives may not have been those that have been communicated to the U.S., right? Maybe she did a great job letting 11 million illegal immigrants across the border, because that's 11 million prospective voters who can fraudulently cast ballots, or for whom members of her party can create fraudulent ballots, bundle them, and put them in the ballot drop boxes. So she could have done a good job, but not for reasons that they can publicly articulate. So what they're going to do is they're going to keep trying to play up the woman card. They're going to keep trying to play up the fact that Kamala stands for whatever it is we say she stands for, because she doesn't actually stand for anything. She stands for anything that's going to get her in power. They're trying to cover up the fact that she's been declared the furthest left senator of anybody in the Senate.
Yeah.
They're trying to cover up the fact that she also put a lot of black people in jail when she was district attorney of California. They're just trying to rewrite history in order to keep Trump out of office. And so, whether you think it's a coincidence or not, there was an assassination attempt on Trump a couple weeks ago. Personally, I don't think it's going to be the last, given the fact that there's a lot of people within the deep state who don't want him in and didn't want him in 2020 and also didn't want him in 2016. So we have to take everything into historical context. The deep state did everything that they could to keep him out of office in 2016 by insinuating that the Russians were the ones who hacked the DNC, when forensic analysis suggests actually it was probably somebody within the DNC that kind of let those emails get out. The Democrats were incredibly adept at shifting the public's focus away from the verifiably true but incriminating emails that were discovered within their inbox to the possibility that, Trump and Russia were the reasons why these emails have come out. Well, a big reason why that message had legs is because the NSA and the three-letter agencies were also trying to push this idea to shift the American voters' desires away from Trump towards Hillary. Okay. During the Trump administration, all Russiagate, everything that was done to possibly obstruct Trump from governing by these three-letter agencies was also done. The 2020 election, which I don't think was a legitimate election, was done. And then fast forward to 2024, if you can't keep someone out of office, if you can't delegitimize him when he's in office, if you can't put him in jail and prevent him from getting into office, then they're going to go the Kennedy route, right? Which I think was attempted a couple weeks ago. It was definitely attempted a couple weeks ago, but I think it was, if I had to bet, I think it was with the coordination of the three-letter agencies. I don't think it's going to be the last time that happens. And that doesn't mean they're going to be successful. If Trump is smart, he's going to hire private security. He's going to invest at least as much time keeping himself alive as he is, going against Kamala and campaigning against her. I think if he can stay alive and prevent any sort of massive disruption to the election process, he's going to win. But why would you assume that they're going to allow him to stay alive?
Yeah.
Why would you assume that there's not going to be a massive disruption to the election process? The disruption that I can see as most plausible is because Republicans vote on election day disproportionately to Democrats. If there was any sort of quote unquote natural disaster on election day that prevented Republicans from getting to the ballot box, that would massively skew the amount of votes that they could count towards the Democrats and away from the Republicans. So if Democrats are in office and countries around the world don't want Trump to get in, and there was an organized attack on the U.S. power grid done by a country that didn't want Trump to get in, why would the Democrats try to stop it? Who would investigate it, right? Because at worst, they would say, oh, government incompetence. We didn't know that China was going to attack the power grid. We didn't know that North Korea was going to attack the power grid. We didn't know this. We didn't know that. And guess what? The FBI is always getting information and tips that they don't act on. So how could you prove that that wasn't the case? So if there was an outside attack on the U.S. power grid that the ruling party allowed to happen to prevent the challenging party's voters from getting to the ballot box, what that would do is it would nominally get them elected. Sure, there'd be challenges in court, but you can't prove that it was intentional.
Right.
During the time that there's challenges in court, they'd probably be able to put Trump in jail because all he's done with his sentencing for 2 out of the 3 cases is delayed it. He hasn't been exonerated of the state crimes that he's been prosecuted for. So if the Democrats can nominally win in November, this thing would take years to litigate. Well, by then Trump will have been put in prison. He might be dead of old age. And then they can keep making the laws and changing the laws and giving amnesty to all the 11 million people who crossed the border illegally under Kamala's watch. So there's a lot of incentives for them to cheat because they don't need, there's never going to be an even playing field or an even balance for their actions to be judged. If they can cheat to stay in power, then they can change how their actions are viewed, right? So there's a lot of reasons to suspect that there's a good chance that this election won't be like the 2016 election or 2012 election or 2008 election. So what can we do to fix that? We can vote early, right? I think that Trump needs to spend probably 33% of his resources staying alive, 33% of his resources campaigning against Kamala or whoever his opponent is going to be, and 33% of his resources telling voters to vote early. Because if you don't vote early, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to vote on election day.
Haven't even thought about this. That's really interesting because I have been thinking a lot about blackouts and power outages this year because, like we were saying before we started filming, the power grid is very fragile. I don't think people understand how fragile it is, but it makes total sense that something would happen on voting day. So everybody get out and vote early this year. Get out and vote early. Freaks me out. Do you guys have a bunker?
No, we need to even set up. We have a backup generator. We haven't even set it up. So I'm ahead in prepping and behind in like setting this stuff up.
Yeah, we have a little generator, but it's not going to be enough. I think we need to get a bigger one. Ours is like just the little small one.
Ours might be twice that size, so it's still small.
I was talking to Mark Lobliner because he was going to send me the kind of generators they have, and he says they're just like it's perfect for what we need. But yeah, I now's the time to prep. I don't like to be a doomsday person, but I always tell women, don't give birth during election year. It makes you so anxious. When you have a new baby during election year, I'm like sitting here in the middle of the night because, you're up in the middle of the night with the baby. You're like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. That's going to happen. That's going to happen. No, I'm just kidding. Have babies whenever you want. But I've been thinking a lot about outages and blackouts. And I made the grave mistake of watching that movie Leave the World Behind a couple of weeks ago. It was like the first night since the baby was born. My husband and I were like, oh, let's take a little time and watch a movie. And we watched Leave the World Behind. And I'm like, why did I watch this? Now I'm even more freaked out. Have you seen it?
No.
It was like... produced by the Obamas, but it's essentially a blackout. It's a blackout. This nice little white family happens to be renting a house on Long Island, and then the black father and his daughter come knocking on the door. They're like, "Oh, this is our house. We live here." The family's like, "Do you really though?" It is actually their house, but then they end up like banding together and trying to survive because all of the comms were down and like these big ships were like coming straight onto the beach. It's just kind of like this apocalyptic movie of what would happen. Like planes were crashing and it all because of a blackout. And then what happened with CrowdStrike recently? What was that?
Yeah, well, there was some sort of, it wasn't an upgrade, but there was a
software update
that apparently didn't go right. But CrowdStrike, they're the ones that reviewed the DNC server in 2016. So you can't really trust anything that's coming out from them. I don't think it's going to be the last time something like that happens between now and the election.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what would even happen if, they say all these voting booths are not connected to the internet, but they are, because some of the voting, I believe that some of the voting infrastructure went down when this update failed to go out. So I mean, what do they even do if you vote and then the technology supporting your vote goes down? It doesn't, and it just forgets what you did.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a reason why paper ballots are probably the safest route. There's also a reason why they are not in place. It's very funny because Democratic voters want voter ID. Like a vast majority of Democratic voters want voter ID laws. I think 79%.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There's a Pew study that was done earlier this year. My recollection on the numbers might not be 100% accurate, but I believe it's 79% of Democratic voters want voter ID, but only 3% of Democratic politicians ended up voting for it. Right? Why is that? Do the Democratic politicians know something that their voting base doesn't? Well, yes, they obviously do. Okay, what about this particular legislation do they know that their voting base doesn't know about? Right?
Right. When Biden first announced that he was stepping down and then endorsed Kamala, my initial reaction was like, oh, this might actually be good for us because nobody likes Kamala because she's an idiot. But then I saw like so many people just coming out and like excited and wanting to support her. And I'm like, I was a little bit shocked. I think I had too much faith in people. And now I'm starting to see that she's a threat, not because of anything that she is capable of, but because she has so much support from the system. And masses of Americans are dumb enough to worship the ground she walks on and vote for her just because of her gender or the color of her skin or whatever. But I was surprised at how many people were so excited. They started posting about it. Like, I can't wait to vote for her. Women, you got to band together, vote for her. I'm like, I didn't think that they would even be that excited for her to be the candidate.
Well, is it paid? How do we know that these people aren't being compensated for it?
That's true too. That I had that thought, but it seemed like, I mean, even a lot of people that I know online, they were like, that I didn't expect. Yeah, they're more liberal, but I used to think they had a decent head on their shoulders, and they're coming for like, we're so excited to vote for Kamala and posting all of this shit about her.
It's probably because they've bought into the narrative that Trump is a threat to democracy. So the preferred alternative is the non-democratically elected Democratic Party candidate. I think about this because my dad's side of my family only votes Democrat. I don't think any of them have ever voted for a Republican candidate ever. And so, I talk to them and try to understand the logic behind why they do the things that they do. And a lot of them have bought into the Trump derangement narratives that they think that, he's a threat to democracy. He's going to be a dictator. They think January 6th was an insurrection. And so if you want to believe why people are doing crazy things today, you have to understand why they did the crazy things that they did 4 years ago, right? And did they learn from the crazy things that they did 4 years ago? Did they learn from the crazy things that they thought 8 years ago? If they haven't learned from the crazy things that they thought 8 years ago or the crazy things that they said 4 years ago, why would you expect their actions today to be any different than what the logical sequence of events would suggest they be now.
Yeah. But at the same time, we are seeing a lot more people who 4 years ago thought that Trump was a racist. They hated the Republican Party. They hated conservatives. A lot of these people are now coming forward and being like, I'm sorry, I thought this. Yeah. Even little things like Amber Rose speaking at the RNC.
Sure.
And somebody sent me a video, it kind of went viral. I think Clown World shared it on Twitter. There's this Hispanic gay guy, and he started out the video. He was like, this is a message to all you Trump supporters, a message to MAGA. I'm sorry. Yeah. I bought into the lies 4 years ago, and now I see blah, blah, blah. And I'm seeing more and more people now who are coming around. Even another little example, Dane Cook, that comedian, he posted a poll on TikTok and Instagram. He's like, I just want to know which of you are voting red, which of you are voting blue. And the last screenshot I saw was 93% voted red. Okay, granted, Dane Cook's most of this audience is probably guys, right? But still, you're seeing a lot more. And I'm pretty sure Dane's conservative because his wife follows like all of the right-wing accounts online. Sure. And if the wife does, then he definitely does. Yeah. But we're just seeing more and more examples of people who have come around over the last 4 years. So I guess I had a little bit too much faith in some people.
That's still a minority of people. And those are the people who were going to be showcasing as examples of, well, yeah, everybody's turning on, because each side wants to create the narrative that everybody's turning on the opposing side.
Of course.
Everybody's leaving their camp to join our camp.
Right.
Well, guess what? There's a lot of people who voted for Trump in 2020 who aren't going to be voting for him now for one reason or another.
That's true, too.
You don't think that the Democrats are going to be able to find these people and elevate their message and amplify their message? Of course they're going to, because that's how propaganda works.
Yeah, that's why they globbed onto Amber Rose so quickly and shoved her on stage at the RNC, because they want people to think that, hey, the tattooed girl on OnlyFans is voting for Trump, so the rest of them are too.
Right.
Yeah, and we can appeal to, because it's like all the old RNC guys, we can appeal to young hip voters. You know, we have an OnlyFans ex-rapper's girlfriend on stage at the RNC. So yeah, I get what you mean. They want to put someone up there to portray something that would support them.
I think a minority of cult members leave the cult. People leave cults all the time.
Yeah.
You talk about, oh, I grew up Mormon. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. I grew up this. I grew up that.
Scientologist.
I'm not Scientologist. Yeah, I grew up in this cult, and then I left. But a lot of people don't leave. Like most people feel they feel scared to leave, and so they end up doubling down on the messages that stopped making sense. But the brain doesn't like cognitive dissonance, and so the easiest way to get around cognitive dissonance is to simply believe a bigger lie, right? It's very, very difficult for people to reconstruct their reality and understand that everything that didn't make sense to them for the last couple of years didn't make sense because it was all bullshit. It's much easier for people to say, well, it didn't make sense because the bad guys were doing X, Y, and Z in order to make it not make sense.
Right. One last thing I want to ask you. What do you think of this sort of online trend of, it's a combination of people obsessed with homesteading, people obsessed with the quote trad wife trend, the right telling people get married as young as possible and have as many kids as possible. What is all this, especially with the homesteading? Why is everybody so obsessed with homesteading now online? And you have all these accounts that are posting pictures of people on a farm, and you have a lot of these young Zoomer accounts that are like, I don't want to be a boss babe. Why would you want to sit in a cubicle from 9 to 5 when you can milk cows all day and frolic in the fields? And I'm like, have you guys ever been to a farm?
No, they haven't.
Like, have you ever been on a farm? Like, I probably spent a couple of days on a farm in my entire life, and even that was enough to tell me this is really hard work.
Right.
And so what is with this trend? And it's always coupled with the, quote, trad wife trend.
Yeah. Well, I think the grass is always greener on the other side is one saying that will always hold true. So you think about, how did corporations get workers to leave farms to come to cities? Because 120 years ago, all of Americans worked on farms.
That's right.
In order for corporations to get their labor prices down, they needed these farmers to move to the cities. So they had to convince them that, oh, you don't have to worry about milking your cows until you're old and arthritic and then having your kids do it. You can come work at the factory and get a pension.
Yep.
So they're painting this like, almost communist level propaganda picture of what you're looking at is terrible because you know it. The devil that you know is terrible. This is much better. So leave what you have behind, go to this. Well, now everybody's come to the cities, And there's things that are bad about cities. They're dirty, there's crime, they're loud, and people can romanticize what it's like to be on a farm because they never grew up doing manual labor. So they don't know, like, the cows don't milk themselves. The fields don't till themselves. A lot of work needs to be done, and you don't have enough money to pay other people to do it because food margins are quite small, right? So you're not going to make money farming if you do it at a small level, or if you do, it's because you're the one doing the labor. You cannot subcontract it out. So the economic model behind all of it is just totally bogus. It's just not going to work. But a lot of women are realizing, like, this job that I have at 26 years old is fucking bullshit. I have to answer to some idiot boss, and my company is lying to me all the time. I barely have enough money to buy the things that I assumed I'd have enough money to buy. I just want an escape. And so a lot of online content creation is just offering people an escape.
Yeah.
A deus ex machina of, oh, well, if I just had this, my life would be great.
Right.
It doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be plausible. And that's what this is offering people.
I see. Yeah. And then I don't know if you even know who Ballerina Farm is.
No.
Yeah, you wouldn't. It's this Mormon mother. She and her husband are mega rich. Her husband is the heir to JetBlue, and they have 8 children. They live on this pristine piece of land in Utah, and she went to Juilliard for ballet, and they're like this picture perfect, genetically blessed blonde family. They're beautiful, but she's got millions and millions of followers, tens of millions of views on Instagram and TikTok. They actually live on a farm. They milk the cows every day. She makes homemade sourdough. They have a little online shop of, like, she sells her sourdough starter, freeze dried, all that stuff, right? And she has become the perfect piece of escapism online.
Yeah.
Recently, there was an article in the Sunday Times. Journalists went to their home to interview them because she became such a huge online phenomenon. And it was revealed that she works really, really, really hard, to the point where sometimes the husband says sometimes she has to spend a week in bed because of the exhaustion. She home births her kids. She's up before dawn milking the cows. And now all these women online are mad because they're like, why are you working her to the bone like this? How could you do this to her? I'm like, what do you guys want? You said you want homesteading. You said you want to live on a farm and have multiple kids and not go to the office. This is literally what it takes. She's doing what it takes.
You're also going to monetize it because she's running 2 businesses. She's doing it, and then she's also making money off of it.
Exactly. She's doing both. And so now you have all these women who are like, this is abuse, this is oppression. And I'm like, and the same women who have been like following her and sharing her content and saying things like, this is so beautiful, this is the real American dream. I'm like, well, which is it? This is actually what it takes. So that's why when I see all the homesteading stuff, I'm like, you have no idea what it takes, because everyone who is behind these accounts, they like live in the suburbs and they order on DoorDash and they use Twitter and they work in a cubicle. It's like, you guys just don't know what it takes. And so when the escapism content, when the veil is pulled back and they see what it actually takes, they don't like it.
Well, the harder people perceive their lives to be, the more escapism they're going to want to fall into.
Right.
And so as inflation goes up, you're going to see more people go into escapism. As dating markets become, slimmer and slimmer pickings, you're going to see more people going into escapism. I think it's a fundamental reality as the United States in many ways becomes deindustrialized, that we can expect more and more people to mentally and emotionally drop out of living life in the present and spend more and more of their time dreaming of how things could be in a deus ex machina situation if my one savior comes and takes me out of my present situation and moves me over there, which is actually dangerous because that's how you end up with like dictators or with Green New Deals or with, submitting to some sort of authoritarian regime that can promise you an escape from your physically and emotionally tormented reality. Yeah, you're gonna. Well, what's the risk? Yeah, of course we'll give communism a chance.
Yeah. Well, that's scary. Well, this was a good episode.
Yeah,
it's always good to have you. I
I
always love to bring you some of these questions because you bring a really great perspective that even though most of my audience is female, I think they would have enjoyed to hear a lot of this because it clarifies a lot of the things that I've tried to talk about. I think we've articulated here in an even more digestible way. So thanks for coming.
Yeah,
Tell everybody where to find you.
Alex Feinberg1 on X, Twitter, as well as on YouTube. Alex Feinberg on YouTube. Alex Feinberg1 on Instagram. Feinberg. If you guys don't know how to spell my name, got a Jewish dad, so got a Jewish last name.
Uh-oh.
Yep. Nothing I can do about it. No, my dad, he's taught me a lot, not directly and indirectly, because he's been right about some things, been wrong about a lot of things. He bought New Balances 20 years ago, and it was embarrassing for me to be his kid. But now everybody's rocking New Balances now, so he's not behind the curve on everything, just some things like politics. Yeah, so hit me up. Keep my DMs open. Go to my website, insanelyaddictive.com. You can get some freebies, sign up for my newsletter, and hit me up. I am fairly accessible. Might take a little bit of time to get back to you, but I will get back. So
yeah, ladies, send your boyfriends and your husbands over to Alex's content, because they can eat well and get shredded.
Especially if you want, if you want a little bit more muscle in the bedroom, you can send your boyfriends over, send your husbands over to me, and that's one of the specialties that we do is teach people how to get shredded eating foods that they love and also make more money working less. So that's been one of the transitions in how I've structured my business is, a lot of the experience that I've developed over the last 10 years is not just figuring out how to get ripped eating delicious food, but it's also how to figure out how to make more money working less.
Yeah.
And you have to understand a lot of the processes behind the scenes in order to figure out, like, how do I get paid decent compensation while not working so hard? Well, I can start a side business because, we're doing what at one point were side businesses.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's been a huge thing for me as a stay-at-home mom is I can work a few hours a week, be home with the kids, and it's still a nice little side income.
Yeah.
It's especially in this economy, it helps a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And also, I even say, I know that the conservatives will probably banish me for this, but I think it's good for moms to even, like, you have your own hobbies, you have your own little side business going on. It's nice. It's nice to have something aside from the kids.
Yeah.
Which is not a popular thing to say amongst conservatives today, but they say you have to lose yourself in your kids, which is fine, but it's nice to have a side income too.
Yeah. You have to lose yourself in your kids, but it's nice to be able to pay the bills. And eat nice food. And all that stuff.
Well, thank you, everybody. Comment below. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Go follow Alex, and we'll see you next time. Bye.